My girlfriend uploaded a selfie captioned, "Finally choosing happiness over habit," less than a week after ending our relationship publicly. I never commented or explained my side. Months later, she deleted the photo after mutual friends started asking why her soulmate had suddenly blocked her on every platform. "You were holding me back." I stared at her, not because the words hurt, because of how easily she said them. 3 years. 1,000 ordinary Sundays. The kind of relationship where you know exactly how someone takes their coffee, which side of the bed they prefer, what their laugh sounds like at 2 a.m. when something is genuinely funny versus politely funny. Reduced to 6 words. Delivered like a weather report. Jessica was standing near the window of our apartment, technically my apartment, the one she'd been splitting rent on for 14 months, and she wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She had the calm, slightly rehearsed energy of someone who had already moved through this moment in their head dozens of times before arriving at it in real life. I noticed, somewhere in the back of my mind, that her overnight bag was already packed, not overflowing, not the kind of bag you pack in a panic. The kind you pack methodically over several days because you've already decided. "Okay," I said. She blinked. I think she expected more. "That's it," she said. "What would you like me to say?" She shook her head, picked up the bag, and left. I sat on the couch for a long time after that. Not devastated. Not numb. Something more complicated than either. A quiet, careful feeling, like the moment after a loud noise when you're listening to see if it comes again. Less than 72 hours later, she posted the selfie. The one with the caption, "Finally choosing happiness over habit." I didn't comment. I didn't respond to the 12 texts asking if I was okay. I didn't post anything in return. Months later, the same people who double-tapped that photo would be asking why her soulmate had blocked her on every platform without a single word of explanation. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The post went up on a Thursday morning. I know because I was sitting in a coffee shop near my office, waiting for a client meeting that had been pushed back 40 minutes, when my phone started buzzing with notifications. Not direct messages to me, just the ambient digital vibration of something happening in a social circle that still included both of us. Our mutual friend Priya texted first. "Did you see her post?" Then Marcus. "Bro, you good?" Then 2 people I hadn't spoken to in months, suddenly very interested in how I was doing. I looked at the photo. Jessica had always been photogenic in an effortless way. Good bone structure, an instinct for light. The selfie was taken somewhere bright and warm, soft morning sun, and she was smiling the way people smile when they want to look like they've just arrived at something rather than left something. Lip gloss. Hair loose. Eyes direct. Finally choosing happiness over habit. The caption did what it was designed to do. It told a story without telling a story. It implied, without stating. Anyone who didn't know us would read it as a triumphant personal revelation. Anyone who did know us would read between the lines and understand. She had left someone. That someone had been the habit. She was the happiness. 47 likes in the first hour. By afternoon, over 200. Comments like "You deserve this" and "Glow era" and "Finally." That last one from someone who, as far as I knew, had never expressed any dissatisfaction with our relationship to me directly. I put my phone face down on the table and thought about the client meeting. What I didn't do, and this was a conscious choice, not passivity, was respond. I didn't post a vague quote about loyalty. I didn't text mutual friends to give my version. I didn't call Jessica to ask what exactly she thought I had been holding her back from. I had a reason for the silence. Several reasons, actually. But at the time, what I told myself was simple. Anything I said publicly would be used to extend the story. Silence would end it faster. I was wrong about the timeline. I was right about everything else. Priya called me that evening. "Are you okay?" she asked. Priya was the kind of person who asked that question and actually waited for the real answer. "I'm fine," I said. "She's saying you two have been unhappy for a long time." "She can say that." "Is it true?" I thought about it. The honest answer was complicated. The easy answer was, not from where I was standing. "I don't know what she was feeling," I said. Priya was quiet for a moment. "You're not going to say anything publicly, are you?" It wasn't really a question. "No." She sighed. Not with frustration. With something more like resignation. I figured. "Okay. I just want you to know I'm not taking sides. I'm not asking you to." We hung up, and I sat in my apartment. Her name was still on the lease for another 3 weeks, and tried to figure out what I was actually feeling beneath the carefully maintained calm. Something didn't quite add up. I couldn't put my finger on it yet. I just knew the way she'd packed that bag hadn't looked like heartbreak. It had looked like logistics. I didn't realize it then, but that distinction would end up meaning everything. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. The first 2 weeks were the hardest, and not for the reason people assumed. It wasn't grief, exactly. It was disorientation. 3 years of shared routine. The texts throughout the day, the coordinated dinners, the automatic assumption that weekends had a shape. All of that evaporated at once, and what was left was a lot of unstructured time that I didn't know what to do with. I started going to the gym at 6 a.m. Not because I had some revenge body plan. Genuinely, just because I needed somewhere to put the energy, and the gym was open and required no social negotiation. I'd go, work until I was too tired to think too hard, shower, and get to the office early. Work helped more than I expected. I was a project manager at a mid-sized logistics firm. Not glamorous, but I was good at it, and being good at something is its own kind of anchor. I took on 2 additional accounts that month. I stayed late. I ate lunch at my desk. My manager noticed and mentioned something about a potential team lead role opening up in Q3. I let myself focus on that. Mutual friends, predictably, split into categories. There were the ones who maintained genuine contact, Priya, and a guy named Daniel who I'd been friends with longer than I'd known Jessica. There were the ones who quietly drifted, which I understood and didn't resent. And there were the ones who seemed to be performing neutrality, reaching out just enough to stay current on what I was thinking, what I was saying, so they could report back. I didn't confront anyone about it. I just adjusted what I shared. Marcus fell into that third category, I eventually realized. He'd been friends with both of us since college, and I'd always trusted him, but about 3 weeks after the breakup he started asking strange questions. Not about me, about whether I'd heard from Jessica, whether I knew anything about her new situation. I didn't know what new situation he meant, and I said so. He changed the subject quickly. That was the first thing that felt off. The second was a comment that Priya made offhand, about 2 weeks later. We were getting coffee, and she mentioned that Jessica had seemed different in the months before the breakup. Like she was already somewhere else, Priya said, and then looked uncomfortable, like she'd said more than she intended. I filed it away. I wasn't building a case. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just noticing that the story I'd been presented with, you were holding me back, I'm choosing happiness, had some loose threads, edges that didn't quite meet. I went back to the gym, back to work, back to the quiet routine of rebuilding a life one ordinary day at a time. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to the nervousness in Marcus's voice when he changed the subject. Somewhere around the 6-week mark, the new boyfriend appeared. His name, according to the posts, was Caleb. He surfaced gradually, first in the background of a photo, then tagged, then featured. Within 2 weeks, he was front and center. A tall guy with the kind of jawline that photographs well, invariably photographed in context that implied a certain level of income. Restaurants with low lighting and no prices on the menu. A weekend trip to some cabin upstate. A photo from what looked like a rooftop bar, skyline behind them, both of them laughing at something just off camera. The captions were doing a lot of work. He makes ordinary days feel like something. I forgot what it felt like to be chosen. This is what I was waiting for without knowing I was waiting. The mutual friends responded accordingly. Priya texted me once to ask if I was seeing Jessica's posts, and I said yes. She didn't push further, which I appreciated. Marcus, on the other hand, seemed suddenly very enthusiastic about Caleb, sending me screenshots I hadn't asked for, offering commentary, as if keeping me informed was a favor. I looked at the photos with the detachment of someone studying a subject they no longer have a stake in. Caleb looked successful. The restaurants were real. The cabin existed. Nothing about the surface was obviously false. But I kept coming back to something small. In the cabin photo, Jessica was wearing a jacket I recognized. Not because it was distinctive, it was a plain dark green fleece, but because I'd seen it before. I'd seen it in a photo she'd posted months earlier. Before we broke up. A photo she'd captioned something innocuous about an autumn hike. I'd assumed she'd gone with her friend group. Now, looking at the cabin photo, at the angle of the shot, at the way Caleb was the one holding the camera, and she was the one laughing in exactly the way she laughed when she was comfortable with someone. I didn't say anything, but I saved the dates of both posts and looked at a calendar. Then, a small thing. A deleted comment under one of her photos. I only caught it because someone had screenshotted it and sent it to a group chat I was still in, someone asking a lighthearted question about where they'd met, and the comment was gone within hours. Why delete a simple question about how you met? I let it go. Or I told myself I was letting it go. What I was actually doing was waiting. Daniel was the one who told me. Not intentionally. We were at his place watching a game, and he mentioned, in the context of something else entirely, that he'd run into Jessica and Caleb at a bar in late September. I looked at him. September, I said. Which weekend? He thought about it. The one after Labor Day. Maybe the 8th? 9th. Jessica and I had broken up at the end of October. I kept my face neutral. You'd met him before? Daniel realized, about half a second too late, what he'd just said. He looked at the TV. I mean, I'd seen him around. It was just a bar. She introduce you? He was quiet for a moment. She said he was a friend of a friend. I nodded slowly. We watched the game. Neither of us said anything for a while. I wasn't angry. That surprised me. I'd have expected anger, and what I found instead was something cooler and more precise. The feeling of a picture snapping into focus. 6 weeks before she ended things, she was at a bar with Caleb, introducing him as a friend of a friend. The packed bag made more sense now. The rehearsed calm made more sense. You were holding me back, said with no tears, with a bag already packed, from a person who had, apparently, already been building the next thing while still inside the current one. I didn't confront Daniel. It wasn't his information to share, and he clearly hadn't meant to share it. I just said, thanks for being honest, and meant it, and we watched the rest of the game. I didn't post anything. I didn't text Jessica. I didn't call anyone to update them on what I'd learned. I drove home, made dinner, and sat with the information for a while. What I'd found so far was a timeline that didn't work, a relationship that had likely ended before it officially ended, a public narrative constructed to make one person look like they were finally choosing themselves, when the more accurate version was considerably less flattering. But I didn't have enough yet to understand why the image had been constructed so deliberately. Why the caption? Why the posts? Why the continuous performance of a perfect new life? What I found next was much worse. November came, and I genuinely tried to put it down. That's the honest version. Not a performance of moving on, an actual attempt to stop carrying something that wasn't mine to carry. What she'd done was what she'd done. The timeline was what it was. I wasn't going to get an apology or a corrected narrative, and pursuing either would cost me more than it was worth. I started running in the mornings instead of just the gym. There's something about sustained outdoor movement that clears the specific kind of mental clutter that quiet apartments don't. The team lead role came through in November. I got the official offer on a Wednesday, accepted it by Thursday. It came with a title change and a salary adjustment that was significant enough to shift some things. I started looking at apartments I actually wanted to live in rather than ones I'd chosen because they were practical for 2 people. I found a place in a different neighborhood. Quieter, better light. Moving helped. There's something about physically occupying a new space that breaks the hold a previous chapter has on you. The old apartment had been a container for a particular version of my life. This one was blank. I let weeks pass. I stopped checking her profile. I stopped analyzing screenshots. I let the story become background noise. By late November, I was genuinely better. Not performing better, actually better. Sleeping properly. Present at work. Laughing easily again. I thought the story was done. Then Priya called me on a Sunday morning in early December, and her voice had a particular quality to it. Careful and slightly hesitant, the way someone sounds when they've been debating whether to make a call for a few days. I need to tell you something, she said. And I want to say up front that I probably should have told you sooner, and I'm sorry I didn't. I sat down. Okay, I said. Tell me. Priya had known more than she'd said. Not everything, but enough that her silence, she told me, had been weighing on her for weeks. She started at the beginning. Caleb wasn't a friend of a friend. He was someone Jessica had met at a work event in August, a full 3 months before we broke up. Priya knew because Jessica had mentioned him in a conversation that Priya had initially read as ordinary, the kind of thing you say about someone interesting you've just met. Except the conversations didn't stop. They became a pattern, and the pattern had a texture that Priya, in retrospect, recognized as something more than professional interest. I told myself it wasn't my place, Priya said, that I didn't know for certain, that maybe I was reading into it. It's okay, I said, and I meant it. It's not really. I let her continue. The more complicated part was this. Caleb had a reputation. Not the kind that gets publicly documented, but the kind that circulates quietly in certain overlapping social circles. He'd been involved with someone else in a similarly constructed situation about 2 years earlier. Introduced as a friend. Present in the background of a relationship while it was ending. Then suddenly the main character. The woman before Jessica had figured it out about 4 months in. She'd told people. Those people were peripheral to our group. 1 degree removed, the kind of connection you maintain through occasional mutual events. One of them had apparently mentioned it to Marcus months ago. Marcus had not mentioned it to me. He didn't want to get involved, Priya said, with a flatness that told me she didn't think much of that reasoning either. I sat with that for a moment. There's more, she said. The professional image Caleb had been projecting, the restaurants, the trips, the rooftop bar with the skyline, was partially constructed. He had some money. That part was real, but the specific lifestyle being performed online was aspirational rather than actual. The cabin upstate belonged to his brother. The restaurant photos had all been taken over the course of a single weekend in New York, not spread across months of spontaneous romance. Several people in his extended circle knew this, including people who were now loosely connected to Jessica's audience. She doesn't know, Priya said. Or she didn't, when I last talked to her. She's built this whole narrative around him, and I think she genuinely believes the version she's been telling. Or she did, I said. Yes, Priya agreed. Or she did. I asked Priya why she was telling me now. She was quiet for a moment. Because I ran into Caleb last week, she said. And the way he talked about her, the way he talked about her future plans, things she wanted, places she wanted to go. He was talking about her like she was a project, not a person. That landed. I also saw her post something yesterday that I think was hiding something. She cropped out part of a photo that she'd previously posted with a location tag. And I can see in the background of the new version that there's someone else in the frame that wasn't there before. She sent me a screenshot. I looked at it for a long time. The someone in the cropped out background was a woman I didn't recognize. But I recognized the expression on Jessica's face, slightly off, slightly tight. The smile she used when she was managing something rather than feeling it. The performance was developing cracks. The collapse happened gradually, and then all at once. The first public sign was subtle. A post Jessica put up in mid-December that attracted more questions than usual. It was a photo of a dinner table, ambient and romantic, but someone in the comments asked a friendly question about the restaurant, and she answered with the name of a place that, according to another commenter, had closed 8 months earlier. She deleted the comment thread, edited the caption, but screenshots exist. A week later, one of Caleb's former colleagues posted something on their own page, not about Caleb directly, just a general comment about people who curate glamorous online lives from borrowed contexts. The post was vague enough to be deniable. It was specific enough that people who knew the situation understood exactly what it was about. Tags started appearing in the comments. Not many, just enough. Then Marcus, of all people, made a mistake. He was in a group chat that included both people adjacent to Caleb's past and people adjacent to our old friend group, and he made the error of saying something casually, some comment meant to defend Jessica, some version of the story he'd been holding, and someone in the chat knew enough to push back with specifics. That conversation leaked. Conversations always leak. And what it revealed, to people who hadn't known the full shape of things, was that the breakup had been messier than the choosing happiness over habit narrative suggested. That the timeline was contested. That at least 2 people had known about Caleb before the breakup and had not said anything. The old posts started getting revisited. Not by everyone. Not loudly. But I noticed that the comments had thinned. Some of the earlier enthusiastic responses had been quietly deleted by the people who'd left them. Priya texted me. People are starting to figure it out. I didn't respond because I didn't need to. Then, in the last week of December, something happened that I hadn't predicted and that Priya told me about later, with a careful neutrality that told me she understood the weight of it. Caleb blocked Jessica on every platform. No explanation. No final post. No message, as far as anyone knew. Just present, and then not present. Soulmate to stranger in the space of a single morning. Exactly the way she'd framed what I had done to her. I thought about how she'd felt, reading that word, soulmate, and believing it, and I didn't feel satisfaction. I want to be clear about that. What I felt was something quieter and sadder. The sense of watching something inevitable arrive, not because you wanted it to arrive, but because the math had always been pointing there. She called Priya twice that week. Priya answered once. I didn't reach out. I had nothing to offer that wouldn't have made things worse for either of us. The story traveled the way stories do in interconnected social circles, not as a single revelation, but as a slow accumulation of corrections. A comment here, a conversation there. Someone at a party saying actually, from what I heard, and the actually doing all the work. Nobody came to me to ask for my version. I appreciated that. It would have been an awkward position, confirming a narrative that reflected poorly on someone I'd cared about, or staying silent and seeming evasive. The truth was finding its own transportation, which was the only kind I'd ever trusted. I heard, through Priya, that some of the more enthusiastic commenters on Jessica's breakup post were feeling quietly embarrassed. Not embarrassed enough to do anything. People rarely are, but the kind of embarrassed that makes you not want to bring a subject up. The choosing happiness over habit caption, which had seemed inspirational 6 months ago, now had a retroactive irony to it that nobody wanted to claim. The mutual friend, who'd commented finally, stopped attending the group hangs for a while. Marcus sent me a text in early January. It said, "I probably should have told you some stuff earlier. I'm sorry." I stared at it for a while. I thought about what I actually wanted from him. What response would feel true rather than performed? I wrote back, "I know. It's okay." Because it was, mostly, people make decisions about what to involve themselves in. And Marcus had made his, and the consequences of that decision had arranged themselves without my intervention. There wasn't much left to be angry about. Daniel texted to say he'd gotten a promotion and wanted to get dinner. We went. We talked about things that had nothing to do with any of this. That felt like recovery. The thing about a constructed narrative is that it requires constant maintenance. It needs to be fed, new posts, new captions, new evidence of the life you're presenting. When the person at the center stops feeding it, or when the architecture underneath it starts to crack, the whole thing doesn't explode. It just quietly deflates. The selfie was still up. For now. Priya noticed first. She texted me on a Tuesday evening in late January with just, "It's gone." I knew what she meant before I looked. The selfie had been deleted. Not just the post. The associated comments, the saves, the tagged reshares she'd encouraged. The caption that had functioned as a public statement about freedom and choice and the brave act of leaving something that wasn't serving you. All of it, gone. The square blank space it left in the grid was quietly filled by the post that came before it, the chronology of her public life sliding together as if the photo had never existed. No announcement. No updated caption. No replacement post. Just removal. I thought about what it must have taken to decide to delete it. Not logistically. The click itself is nothing, but the internal accounting required to acknowledge that a post you'd built a narrative around, that had received 200 likes and dozens of affirming comments, that had effectively announced the end of your old life and the beginning of your better one, had become a liability rather than an asset. The comments under that photo, near the end, had started to have a different texture. Not hostile. Most people aren't hostile, they're just suddenly less present. Questions that lingered without answers. The kind of silence that, in a comments section, functions as its own message. She'd made the calculation. I wasn't glad. I want to be honest about that too. There was no flash of vindication, no sense of the scales evening out. What I felt, sitting with my phone in the new apartment with the better light, was something more like completion. A chapter ending on its own terms, without requiring anything from me. The silence that followed, though, that stayed. She messaged me in February. Not through any of the main platforms. I'd removed her from those quietly, one by one, over the preceding months, not as a statement, but as a simple matter of not wanting the ambient noise of her curated life in my peripheral vision. She found a channel I'd forgotten I'd left open, an old email address I used for newsletters and low-priority correspondence. The message was 3 paragraphs. The first was an acknowledgement that she owed me an explanation, and that she was sorry she hadn't given me one before. The second was the explanation itself, or a version of it. She framed it as confusion, uncertainty, feelings that had developed unexpectedly and that she hadn't handled well. There was a paragraph about how she'd convinced herself that ending things was the honest choice, even if the timing was imperfect. She used the word imperfect where most people would have used a different word. The third was an offer. Not explicitly, but it was there. The suggestion that there was space, if I wanted it, to talk, to understand each other better, to come to some kind of peace with what had happened. I read it twice. I thought about the packed bag, the caption, the choreography of it, the way the performance of her choosing herself had required, as its raw material, a version of me that was an obstacle, a habit, something to be escaped rather than respected. I thought about the 3 years of ordinary Sundays, and I thought about the fact that nothing in the message asked how I was. It was a document about her confusion, her feelings, her process, her offer. I closed the email. I didn't reply, not out of cruelty, not as a final move in some extended chess game. I closed it because there was genuinely nothing in it that required a response. The conversation she was trying to have was one I'd already finished having with myself, alone, over the preceding months. Whatever peace she was seeking from me, validation, forgiveness, closure, I wasn't sure which. It wasn't mine to provide. I got up, made coffee, and looked out the window at the street below. It was an ordinary Tuesday. That was enough. Priya and I got coffee on a Saturday morning in March. We sat near the window. The city was doing the particular thing it does in early spring. Still cold, but with a quality of light that's different, like the place is remembering itself. We talked about her job, my new role, a book she was reading that she thought I'd like. At some point she asked, "Do you feel like it's over?" "All of it." I thought about it honestly. "Yeah," I said. "I think so." "Good," she said. She didn't say anything else about it. Neither did I. On the walk back, I passed a wall covered in the kind of faded posters you see in cities, events that have already happened, announcements for things that no longer need announcing. Most of them were weeks old. A few were months old. Still up, no longer relevant, waiting to be covered by something new. The photo that announced her freedom had disappeared. The silence that followed never did.